Hi everyone and welcome to Sub to Cloud. Today we are talking about a topic about my t-shirt because I love AWS, but sometimes I don't like. Sometimes I hate AWS for different reasons, and today I will tell you why. Things that I hate on AWS. AWS is a very good company that do a lot of very good things for its customers, but sometimes had mistakes or things that I hate because are not good for me or for my customer or for people in general. And today we are talking about this. And the first thing that I hate is the Spanish console. Why I hate the Spanish console? That is very controversial in Spanish because one of the problems with the Spanish console, I don't know that this happened in other console in other language, is use literal translation of all elements in the console. And for me, that I Spanish native, is very complex because sometimes I don't understand the Spanish console. That this is a very big problem because I'm not native in English. I don't speak English correctly. And I understand better the console on English than the console on Spanish. And for me, that is a problem. And why you say, why it's a problem? Because I open a lot of new console. And by default, the console open in your browser language. For example, I have one browser only to open AWS console for that reason because I configure this browser on English, but I can't configure it on English for all my things because sometimes I need to enter to Spanish website that are in Spanish, and it's a big problem for me. And I hate this because it's a very stupid thing, but it's very frustrating for me. Enter to the Spanish console and don't understand nothing. Another thing that I hate is AWS icons. I don't hate the icons myself, but I hate how AWS do change in AWS icons. They launched AWS 3D icons a lot of years ago when they launched AWS. That is an icons very old-fashioned now, but are cool. But in 2018 they launched a new set of icons, but they did a very big mistake. Is put the icons in a very dark color. It's not black, it's maybe blue, but very dark blue, and it's awful color because you can't difference the icons from different services, from database services or for compute services or analytic service or security service. And in 2019, 1 year later, they launched the next set of icons that is the actual set of icons is very similar with different color for service. It's the same color that they launched for in the past. They added other color for some services that, like for example, networking at this moment that don't have a color. Now it's purple. And that is very cool. That is the icons that I use every day. But in 2024, they changed the set of icons again, only for one service. They changed the database service icon colors from blue to a pink. I think it's a pink. I'm very bad to different colors. Okay, I am a man. We are very bad to different colors. But it's a pink, and I don't hate the color. I like pink color. But the problem is always the database in AWS on AWS are blue. Now are pink, and that is a very stupid change that they made, and that's the thing that I hate. I did a lot of AWS architecture, and I continue to do a lot of AWS architecture, a lot of AWS diagrams with the icons. And sometimes when you need to reuse one of your architecture, or you need to modify something that are the old icons. That's awful for me, because sometimes you need to change a lot of things, and that is very frustrating, and I hate this. Also, I hate AWS naming. And why I hate AWS naming is for the same reason about the icons, because sometimes it's very hard when you write documentation, or when you write article, a blog post, or something similar, or video, because exists two different namings on AWS, when is Amazon or is AWS. And for Amazon, they say the rule is when it's a standalone service, and AWS when it's a service that depends of AWS, that other service dependency. And okay, that is right, maybe, but that have a lot of controversy about this. For example, Amazon AKS and Amazon ECS are a container service, and AWS Fargate is a mode from AKS and AKS and ECS. But at the same time, ECS depends of EC2, or AKS depends of EC2. That is very hard to understand why they are Amazon and not AWS. Happen the same with when you talk about CloudWatch, Amazon CloudWatch, AWS CloudTrail, AWS CloudFormation. AWS CloudFormation is AWS because launch other AWS services, but CloudWatch monitoring other AWS services. That is very weird. Why do you put Amazon in their name? Or Amazon AP Gateway is Amazon because it's a standalone service, but depends of AWS Lambda. That is a dependency. It's a service that only can run on AWS. And for example, Amazon AP Gateway depends of AWS Lambda, or maybe Amazon EC2 or other AWS services, and that is very weird. We have a joke about this, and we said that it's a D20. It's a roll dice that choose the name. Depends of the number that you obtain when you launch the dice. Someone chooses if it's Amazon or is AWS. I think it's the only correct answer for the AWS naming, because no sense. That's I think that have no sense for me, and for a lot of people, and that's the thing that they hate a lot, because it's very complex when you write an article or blog post or video, and someone told you that you are mistaken the Amazon or AWS name. Sometimes you need to. Usually, I don't put Amazon or AWS name. Usually, I only say ECS or EC2 or CloudWatch or Lambda. Instead, they say the full name. Now we are talking about something that for me is very annoying. Is the non-serverless service. Something serverless needs to scale to zero. It's going to zero waste. For me, that is the principle, one of the principles of any serverless service, and that is a thing that AWS said in the past. But now a lot of new services don't are compliant with this rule. Don't scale to zero. For example, a lot of services scale to zero, like AWS Lambda, Fargate, DynamoDB, SQS. When you use these services and you don't have compute use, you don't pay anything. Maybe you only paid the storage for these services, but not the price for running these servers, because are not running, are scaled to zero. But now a lot of new services with the serverless name, like Amazon Aurora serverless, Amazon Redshift serverless, OpenSearch serverless, Elasticsearch serverless, don't scale to zero. And for me, that services don't deserve serverless name. Maybe only Amazon Aurora, because now the version 2 scaled to zero from 3 months ago or 2 months ago. Amazon Aurora serverless scaled to zero. But in the past, that is impossible with version 2. And for me, that is a thing that is mandatory for any serverless service. And that is a thing that I hate a lot. We are talking about 2 pizza teams. That is a very cool idea that AWS had and Amazon had, and said your teams need to be fed with 2 pizzas. When you buy food for your team, they can be fed with only 2 pizzas. If you need more, you need to split your team. And this is a very good idea because the teams are very dynamic. They are very quick to implement things. But sometimes 2 pizza teams not talk with other 2 pizza teams. And that is a thing about the AWS organization that I hate, because create a lot of controversy and a lot of different things or bad things that is very hard to manage. For example, feature flags. AWS launched 2 different services that do the same thing, the feature flags. AWS App Config and Amazon CloudWatch evidently. Okay, they will deprecate Amazon CloudWatch evidently, but because that have any sense, because they have AWS App Config to do this. But why do you launch 2 services at the same, not at the same time, but in very short time that do the same thing? That is very confused for me and for the customer. And I hate this. I hate this about the 2 pizza team. Sometimes the 2 pizza team don't speak between them. And also happen with containers on AWS. Exists 17 ways to run a container on AWS. I think it's more. Corey Quinn explained 16 more ways to run a container on AWS. Some are tricky or very not a very good best practice, but exists a lot of ways to run a container, more than 17, that are very confused for customer, because sometimes they implement a thing that they think are good, but you know that is not the correct way to run a container. Run a container, for example, is the good way is EKS or ECS, not run or maybe in App Runner or different services. But some services are not good for run containers, like Elastic Beanstalk, for example. And that possibility that the service teams create new features that run containers on AWS that are the same thing that other teams do in other AWS services, is very confused. And I hate this because create a lot of problems. Exists a rule on AWS that say everything need to run on AWS API. Every action need to be run on AWS API. And that is not 100% true, but in the majority of cases it's true. But sometimes that is a problem because the implementation of the API is different. That is a consequence of the 2 pizza teams that we talk early. But for example, the tags. When you try to implement tags or tags in different services, it's not the same. For example, in EC2, S3, and OpenSearch, the name of the action is different. It's create tags, put object tagging, or add tags is different. And also the implementation is different because one is an HTTP call directly, the other is a XML call, and the last one is a JSON. You need to send a JSON in the API, and that is very confused because when you try to implement, for example, a creation of tag in your own application to create tags in all the element that you run on AWS, sometimes it's very, very hard. And AWS have some solution to do this, but why the API calls are different? Why the name of the API actions are different? That is a consequence about two pixel teams. But I hate this because that is a real implementation that is very complex, that create problems, and sometimes create a lot of complexity to implement your own tools on AWS. In 2024, we had another problem that I hate a lot, that is the deprecation. In 2024, we had a lot of deprecation, but it's amazing. It's the number of deprecation on AWS have the number of deprecation is amazing in comparison with other years, and that is not a bad thing because some of the service people don't use or are a bad or are things that have another solution that you can use, like Amazon Cloud Service. But at the same time, how AWS communicate this deprecation are awful. In the beginning, we only discovered this because in the console said a message that say you can run new customer for some of these services, and someone put a tweet on Twitter or X, and Jeff Barr answered this tweet, and that is the official response to discover the first of 2024 deprecation, and that is awful. It's not the way to communicate your customer or the people, your user. You will deprecate a lot of AWS services. That is a very bad thing that I hate a lot, and for me create a bad feeling about AWS. Okay, I hate a lot of things, but I need another video to say more things that I hate, because exist more things that I hate on AWS, and I wait for the next video because I explain more AWS services or more things that I hate on AWS. Bye bye.